I'm going to let Paul introduce tonight's speaker.
Yay. So this is a tough one. If you've never Googled Richard Hitt, you should try it sometime. There's some surprising bits of his biography that most of us would never know about. He is going to talk about Wasps An Under-appreciated Pollinator. He is the founding president of Wild Ones, which means he has been president for 10 years. And that's a long time to do newsletters and schedule speakers and plan events and all sorts of things like that. So appreciate all of the work that he's done there. He also is a member of the Tennessee Native Plant Society, and in 2013 became a Tennessee naturalist, which he said in the announcement was a life-changing experience for him. And obviously, professor of mathematics, and a very well-known professor of mathematics, $2 million of grants from the National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Education, Sun Microsystems, and Morrison Healthcare for research, instrumentation, and education. And in 1999, received the Teacher of the Year Award from the International Student Association, which is a pretty significant honor for anybody. So yes, that's nice. He is an accomplished flautist. I don't know if you know that or not. Some of you do, but he performed with the Nashville Philharmonic Flute Ensemble from 2009 to 2015 after he retired and was a sub for the Nashville Philharmonic Orchestra. I think at Florida State, he graduated Phi Beta Kappa and was inducted in Phi Beta Kappa his junior year. And he got a master's degree and a PhD in mathematics, also from Florida State University. But for me, the thing I did not know until I read the biography, and I looked for pictures, they just weren't there. Richard was the drum major for his marching band junior and senior year in high school in Mobile, Alabama, which is a major culture shock from just outside Washington, D.C. But nonetheless, became the drum major of an award-winning band and won numerous awards himself as a flautist. And so I will say this personally, and it's hard not to be jealous of somebody with a near photographic memory. I keep reminding myself that Richard's, I'm less than 2 years into native plants. Well, Richard's been at it for 10. And I will keep at it, but my memory is now more photogenic than it is photographic. They won't release the pictures from my brain MRI that I had as part of the Vanderbilt Memory and Aging Study. But somewhere there's a picture of my brain floating around at Vanderbilt, and that's about it. It's never going to be photographic. But Richard is a very patient teacher still. He is always answering questions, presenting challenges. He doesn't embarrass us, always encourages us to learn more, to own what we know and not to minimize our knowledge, and to share that knowledge and experience and plans with others. And so I'm really excited the time we've been able to spend together with coffee and the plant sale and meetings, but I really appreciate what Richard has done. Like I said, 10 years as president is a labor of much love. Yes. And so that's to say, if anybody would like to be president at some point in the not too distant future, my guess is that Richard would not mind not having to do everything for the organization. So, okay. With that, Wasps An Under-appreciated Pollinator.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Paul, and I appreciate your volunteering to be president next year. That's really nice.
That was nice.
Yeah. We are, as a chapter, 4.5 years old. So, but I don't know that I want to do this 5.5 more years to make what Paul said correct. But thank you for the introduction, Paul. I really appreciate it. So before I start the presentation, I'll just mention that about 2 weeks ago, I was kind of realizing that we didn't have a speaker lined up, and the people I was hoping to invite and agree to were not available. So I decided that I would spend 2 weeks taking a slightly deeper dive into wasps than I might have if I hadn't pushed myself into the speaking role. But I have actually been studying wasps since about January, and I'll explain that as I get into the presentation. So thanks everybody for coming, and let me see if I can share my screen. That's always kind of Wasps, an underappreciated pollinator, it's a little misleading. I consider wasps to be quite underappreciated, but not so much as a pollinator, but for all the things that wasps do in the way of services to nature. And so we'll get into that coming up. And I will talk a little bit about the pollination that services that the wasps do. There we go. So this is a rough outline. Usually I open the meeting with a short presentation about wild ones. I think almost all of the audience is a member, so I don't really need to do much on that. And then somebody introduces the speaker, and then it goes on from there. But since I was a speaker, I thought I would just work in the Wild Ones organization spiel into my presentation. But we will talk about wasps. I'm going to start off with a story. Because as soon as you get into the taxonomy, you run the risk of getting a little too complicated. So I'm going to try to get through that without too much pain, but then we'll look at examples and pictures and talk about some of the other services that WASP perform. And so our chapter was chartered in 2018, and we had a group of maybe 8 of us that got together and decided to form a chapter. And we have since grown as high as 165 members and we've doubled, I think, in the past year and a half or so. Nationally, we have about 8,000 members, and that has doubled in the past 2 years, or maybe 3 years. And nationally, we have about 100 chapters now, all the way out west, which we did not have chapters in until recently. We didn't cross the Mississippi until fairly recently. There's the website information. And what we do as a chapter is we have monthly meetings with speakers, as you well know, because you're in one. We have some plant ID hikes, volunteer native plant gardening and invasive plant removal. We currently maintain the native plant gardens at Westmead Elementary School. Yesterday we had 8 volunteers there. We do invasive plant removal at Green Hills Park and Swan Conservation Trust in Lewis County. We have some garden tours coming up this year. We're going to tour Ashley's garden at Abbotsford that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to tour Donnie's garden that we toured last year, and we have a couple of others that I'm working on. But we'll have, I think, about 4 garden tours under our belts by the end of the summer. Plant sales and seed sales are a big part of what we do to get native plants in the hands of people at inexpensive prices. And so let's move on and get into wasps. So I have a gateway wasp, and by that I mean the wasp that was seductively pulled me into studying wasps. But the story is that I was on a mushroom hike in 2017 at Warner Parks, and that's Deb Beasley, who was one of the naturalists back then. She was a great hike leader, wildflowers, mushroom, just anything. We saw some nice mushrooms. There's dead man's fingers. Lantern stinkhorn, I believe, is the common name for that one. And then I was distracted on the hike by this orange bug over on a log with all this equipment that it was carrying around. And so anyway, I wasn't sure what that was. I later, recognized it as a large wasp. But Deb showed us about 35 different species of mushrooms that day. And it took me probably a few weeks to go through all of that and kind of get comfortable with her IDs. And in the process, I kind of forgot about this curiosity that I saw on a log just off the path where we were hiking. And what that wasp was doing was it was taking its ovipositor and let's say drilling, but pushing it through the wood into that log to get to the larva of this sawfly. And it's in the sawfly group, but I think it's commonly called a pigeon horntail. So that's a pretty amazing feat to drill at least 1.5 inches into the log without being able to see where your ovipositor is going, and then lay an egg on the larva of this pigeon horntail. And so when I started looking into that, which only happened, I think 5 years went by before and then in January when I was studying wasp again, I remembered this sighting. And so I looked it up, and it is the long-tailed giant ichneummonid wasp, Megarrhiza macrucis, subspecies macrucis. So if that's not a candidate for the longest combination of common name and scientific name, I really think we should put it up on the list there. Megarrhiza macrucis was split into 3 subspecies at some point, and so that's why we get that subspecies macrucis at the end there. But a lot of people still call it Megarrhiza macrucis without the subspecies, and I think that's fine. The mechanism of the ovipositor is quite fascinating, and I have to say I don't completely understand it, but it has been the subject of intense study, in particular at Delft Technological University in Delft, the Netherlands. They got about a €9 billion grant to build some prototypes for some medical equipment based on the mechanism that the ovipositor of this particular wasp uses. And I think in the next slide, I've got a couple of other pictures of this wasp. And if you can see my cursor, that's the ovipositor right there going into wood. And the back part of the abdomen flips open, and there's a membrane that the wasp can use to coil up the ovipositor. You see that in both pictures pretty well. And this ovipositor, as I mentioned, consists of 2, let's call them sheaths, which surround the ovipositor. And those sheaths go into the wood. One pushes down, then the other pushes down, and then the ovipositor follows. And the wasp has a sense of smell or something at the end of its ovipositor, because it can sense the fungus that the pigeon horntail inserts into the wood to digest the wood, so that when the egg horntail hatches, it has some softer wood to consume. And so the wasp is flying around. It can sense this, let's say, smell of the fungus. I'm not sure what it is actually, but it lands and it uses its antenna to tap on the tree trunk. And as it's tapping on the tree trunk, it has some kind of a sensor that tells us where this cavity is. And then it lines itself up and retracts the ovipositor into that stretching membrane, because it's too long. Even with as long as the hind legs are on that wasp, the ovipositor is too long to insert it directly. So it has to coil it up in that expanded membrane, and it pushes way up on its hind legs, and then it inserts the ovipositor, and then it goes through sometimes a 45-minute process to drill in and deposit that egg on or near the larva of the horntail. And during that up to 45-minute period, the wasp is highly vulnerable, because it can't just fly off, because it's got its ovipositor embedded in the wood. And so I don't have much luck showing videos on YouTube, so I decided not to give that a try. But if you just Google, either the wasp name or the ovipositor, you can find a lot of pictures and a few videos. And of course, people like David Attenborough have made a career out of telling these kinds of nature stories. And so there's a spot that he did, and another one that a PBS show did, that are quite fascinating in terms of the detail and the cinematography. So that was my gateway wasp. And then I got interested in these parasitoid wasps in particular. So in January, I signed up for a Wasp ID class that I learned about with Shannon Trimboli's podcast. She had a PhD student from Penn State University named Louis Nastasi, and he was talking about this Wasp ID class, and I couldn't tell exactly how deep they went, but he claimed it was for non-experts. So I signed up for this remote class, and it met 3 days a week for 2 weeks, and I was able to go to maybe half the classes. I knew I would have trouble attending all of them. But I was tremendously impressed by these young PhD students and early postdoc students that were so enthusiastic about wasps. I'll get more to that later, but it was a very interesting experience to hear all the presentations on wasps for me. If you haven't tried to say wasp in the plural, you need to practice that a few times. It's not easy. I want to call your attention. I don't want you to read all that because it's too small, but there is a Instagram account named That Wasp Guy, and it's owned by Sloan Tomlinson. And he's not just a wasp expert. He's an artist, and he has his hands in a lot of things. But he has these pictures where he'll remove most of the background and then touch up the wasp a bit and get these really incredible scenes. That's one of his pictures, and he's given me permission to use his Instagram pictures as long as I give him credit and don't charge you money for the presentation, non-commercial. So let's get into the taxonomy of wasps a little bit, and that's all we can really do. People spend their lifetimes studying this topic, so our options are pretty limited here. So wasps are in the insect order called Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera has maybe a confusing origin. Most people agree that it means membrane wing, going back to some Greek roots. I'll present an alternative explanation in a minute, but let's just go with that. So the sawflies, the wasps, the ants, and the bees all have these membrane-covered wings. In this order, they have 4 wings, and they're paired. They have 2 hind wings, 1 on each side, and 2 forewings, but the hind wings are much smaller than the forewings. And so, for example, if you are confronted with a termite and a flying ant or a wasp or whatever, and you wanted to make sure you knew what was what, the termite has roughly equal-sized wings, forewing to hind wing, whereas everything in the Hymenoptera genus that has wings, and not everything does, has a much larger forewing than a hind wing. So that's a key aid in distinguishing a Hymenopteran member. Also, a fairly useless distinction, because you can't see it without a microscope, is the hooks or the hamuli that marry the forewing and hind wing together so that they function as a single unit. So that would contrast, for example, with damselflies and things like that have 4 independent wings and are incredibly maneuverable. And it's just one way to figure out something in Hymenoptera and not one of the other many orders of insects. Everything in Hymenoptera has mandible mouth parts, those you can see. And then something that has nothing to do with morphology is the haplodiploid manifestation of reproduction. And that just means that when the female lays an egg, she can either choose to fertilize it with the sperm she carries around from a previous encounter with a male wasp or Hymenopteran, or she can withhold the sperm. If she applies the sperm, she gets a diploid female out of it. If she withholds the sperm, she gets a haploid male. And so all the males have 1 set of chromosomes and all the females have 2 sets of chromosomes. And that's not unique to Hymenoptera, but it's a little bit unusual. So like I said, that's not something you're going to notice, but that's a feature of Hymenopterans. And also the Hymenopterans always undergo complete metamorphosis. Many insects don't, but most do. So that means they start off as an egg, they go have a larval or worm type phase, they form a pupa where they go through their metamorphosis, and then they exit the pupa as an adult. And that would contrast with things like dragonflies, which start as an egg, and then they go into what is usually called a nymph phase, and they change during each molt in the nymph phase, and in the final molt of the nymph phase, they exit as an adult. So that's not complete metamorphosis, that's the shorter version. So we know that wasps are in a Hymenoptera, but what exactly is a wasp? And it's basically anything in Hymenoptera that's not a sawfly. And the way to tell sawflies from wasps generally is the sawflies don't have that wasp waist. And most wasps have a constriction between the thorax and the abdomen, although technically they're not called that in wasps, but we don't want to get down to the technical details tonight. These images are from Hymenoptera of the World, which is 1993 online publication that you can download for free. So in terms of Hymenoptera, everything that's not a sawfly is a wasp in the taxonomic sense. Now that gives a slight problem because the ants and the bees are in the wasp clade inside of Hymenoptera. And traditionally by wasp, we mean wasps that aren't ants and bees. So tonight we will exclude ants and bees from being considered a wasp, but from an evolutionary point of view, they really are wasps. It's just not the way we conventionally use that word. And so there's all these fancy new words like taxonomy, phylogenetics, systematics. Taxonomy is just the way it's always been done, where taxonomists look at morphological features and figure out which groups of plants and animals and whatever go together. Now that we have genetic abilities, though, we can factor that in and incorporate the evolutionary history of things. And the two combine together to form the discipline called systematics. Tonight, we're going to use pretty much all those terms interchangeably because we're not getting that technical. So as far as where Hymenoptera fit in the overall scheme of animals, in the animal kingdom, there's a phylum called Arthropoda, which is a lot of invertebrates. They all have exoskeletons and they all have segmented bodies of some kind. Then we have the class level where we have Insecta and various other things, but the Insecta, or let's just call them insects, have a three-part body. So not only a segmented body, but a body segmented into three parts, 3 pairs of jointed legs, the compound eyes, and a pair of antennae. And then if you add the hamuli in there, the hooks on the wings, that gets you down to Hymenoptera. And then Hymenoptera is split, it's an order, and that's split into 2 suborders. There is the sawflies, and then the group that's the wasps, bees, and ants. And so we're going to ditch the sawflies for the rest of tonight and just talk about the wasps and eliminate the bees and ants as well. So let's see, in the wasp, bees, and ants, there's a suborder called Apocrita, although Heather Holm in her Minnesotan accent calls it Apocrita. And so you can say there's no correct way to pronounce any of these words. I'd be happy just to get the syllables out and not worry about where the emphasis went. But in this suborder Apocrita, there are over 100, not just families, but superfamilies, groups of families. And that's bad news if you're trying to understand wasps, because we think bees are complicated enough, and that is only 7 families, 1 superfamily. Well, it's not even a superfamily, it's just 7 families. So in the Apocrita, we have over 100 superfamilies, and that's just bad news in terms of kind of making a list of things and making progress on identification. So in this suborder that contains the wasps, bees, and ants, there are 2 further divisions. One is Aculeata, and those are the stinging wasps. If you trace the Greek roots back, you can see that means stinging. And then the Parasitoidea, and that's the parasitoid wasp. And a parasitoid wasp is a parasitic wasp that ends up killing its host animal at the time it leaves as an adult. So a parasite continues normally to take resources from its host, but doesn't normally kill it. But these are the types of parasites that kill the host at the end of the road. So we're going to talk about parasitoid wasps and stinging wasps, and we can just refer to them as that, so we don't have to try to remember these 2 strange words. Now, if in the stinging wasp, that's where the bees are and the ants are, and then 6 other superfamilies of wasps. But if you go back to where the bees are in a superfamily that also includes wasps. And so the bees aren't really a superfamily. They're not even a family. There's 7 families. And so it's one of those weird clades caught between those taxonomic layers. This we don't need to worry about too much. This is a phylogenetic chart of Hymenoptera, but you can see that the sawflies are up here. We have the parasitoid wasps there. Sawflies evolved in the, let's see, that would be the Triassic period, about 240 million years ago, and time goes left to right in this chart. The origin of the wasps was about 200 and whatever that slide said, 230, 220 million years ago. And then the parasitoids diversified quite a bit. There are these 2 weird groups here that don't have much going on. They're not well understood even by the scientists. And then we have the stinging wasp down here, which contains the Apoidea, That superfamily is bees and a few apoid bee wasps, and then the Formicodia, which is the ants. And so we're not going to worry too much about the bees and ants tonight, but focus on the things that we traditionally refer to as wasps. So that's a lot of too many scientific words. So I'm going to ask you to not look at that first column. Thank you. And now let's focus on the subclades. That's the parasitoid wasps and the stinging wasps. And if you look at these two intermediate superfamily groups, there's not enough individuals in there for us to worry about tonight. It's a very poorly understood group, as I mentioned, and I've never seen one in that group anywhere. And so I think we can dismiss them and be perfectly okay. And so instead of looking at all these complicated numbers, I've done the, that's the show my work part, but here's what we need to pay attention to. So in parasitoid wasps, they occupy 56% of the total wasps. These two groups we're not going to worry about are just 1.2% collectively, so we're going to ignore them. And then in the stinging wasp, we have about 43%. So it's kind of a 56-43 split with a 1% that we're casting away. And if you check the numbers, they do work out. And we don't need to refer to these in the future, except apoidia is where the bees and the apoid wasp are. And we will see examples later from that superfamily. Other superfamilies will be the Vespoidia, where we have the traditional hornets, yellow jackets, and those wasps that give the entire group a bad name. And then there's another one we'll run into. We've already seen, I guess, the Ichneumonidoidea. And so that's where my gateway wasp resided. And that contains the Darwin wasp group, which we'll talk about a little more in a minute. So that's the taxonomy that we needed to get out of the way. And so now we can talk about some concepts. So I have this theory, and it may be worth the price of admission tonight, but parasitic wasps tend to be specialist predators. If you remember my gateway wasp, it actually only lays eggs on that particular horntail, that one species. And there are 8,000 species of these sawflies. And so imagine the number of specialists that could exist just to address the sawfly group. So that means that if, say, the horntails had or the sawflies, that one species had a population explosion, the ichneumoniid wasp that we looked at earlier is the perfect solution to that, because it can bring that population back into check and not have any damage on any other species at all, because it's a perfect specialist, a single species specialist. Now, if you had a generalist parasitoid wasp that saw the horntail get out of control population-wise, that parasitic wasp could bring the horntails back into where they need to be, but they would have damaging effects on the other hosts that they parasitized with their young. And so having generalist predators and specialist predators work together in a really beautiful way in nature to control population explosions. And insects, better than any other groups I can think of, are capable of having insect explosions. When situations, if they lose one of their predators or if the conditions are just right, they can reproduce like crazy. So let's see what I've said here, if it makes any sense. So this allows parasitic wasps to provide a very fine-tuned response to increases in population of individual species of prey compared to a generalist predator. And this is not really just a picture of pretty colored circles. It indicates, if you think about the prey population increasing on the bottom here to the right, and that's supposed to be predator population. So there's if you've seen other typos, let me know, but that's a typo there. This is the predator population. That would be an equilibrium point where both populations are in a steady state. But if something happens and say the predators decreased in population to that curve, then when the predators decrease, the prey would increase. And so they come out this way. Now we have a lot of the sawflies or whatever the prey is. And with so many sawflies, that's going to stimulate the predator population to increase in number. And as it increases, it will begin to control the prey population, and the prey population's numbers will decrease while the predator population continues to increase. Eventually, there get to be too many predators, so they start decreasing. And as they decrease, then eventually the prey population begins to increase. And so this is a typical cycle you see in predator-prey models. If something happens and just all of a sudden there's an explosion in the prey population, then the predators have just a feast of things to eat. And so eventually their population goes up, and you repeat the same cycle just at a more dramatic scale. Now, these circles don't remain closed forever. A lot of times they will spiral back into the equilibrium point given enough time. But this is how nature stabilizes populations using a predator-prey model. And of course, in the real world, individual species may have multiple predators, or predators may have multiple preys that they work on. So when you try to assemble this all together for an entire ecosystem, it gets quite complicated. But if you pretend that there's one prey and one predator, like there is with the sawfly example we looked at and the ichneumoniid wasp that was my gateway wasp, it works out pretty well just like this. So what about wasps as pollinators? We'll see some pictures in a minute that shows pollen on the wasp, but there are some kind of well-known examples. There's the fig wasps, and that's in tropical ecosystems. They have these strange figs that have the flowers inside the fig, and they are pollinated exclusively by fig wasps. And so there's a whole bunch of fig species, because after all, it's the tropics. And the fig wasps enter the fruit, crawl to the center, lay an egg inside, and then the larvae come out, and eventually it comes back out. But it's the figs in the tropics are pollinated exclusively by the fig wasps. Our local figs and the Mediterranean figs are pollinated a different way. More interestingly, there are orchid wasps, and those occur in Europe, South Africa, but they occur in spades in Australia. They have 200 different species of what they call orchid wasps. And these are plants that evolved their labellum, that's one of the petals in the flower of a wasp, to have the rough shape of a female wasp, depending on the species it's trying to attract. And then somehow over time, the female produced a mimic, you would think it might be a pheromone, but when it goes across species, it's called an allomone, I think. But the orchid can produce the female sex hormone approximately through mimicry, and attract a male wasp to think that it is copulating with its labellum. And of course, in the meantime, it accidentally pollinates the orchid because it just visited an orchid of the same species before it got there. And so this trick is one that orchids play not just on wasps, but on bees as well. It's a little bit difficult to imagine the evolution that created that kind of interdependency, but the poor wasp gets absolutely nothing out of this encounter. And the orchid is the one that comes out on top because it just got pollinated for free without offering any kind of reward. So those stories in nature are there are a lot of them. And like I say, if you watch nature shows on TV, you can hear these all day long. But for the most part, though, wasps are accidental pollinators. They're not there for pollen at all. They're there for nectar, and they accidentally rub up against the anthers and get the pollen on their body somewhere. And wasps are a little bit inept in the sense that they don't have the evolutionary things that bees have to keep the pollen on there. Bees have to have pollen to provision their young. So they're all about collecting pollen. They have the hairs to keep it there. They have the special concave sections on their femur to pack the pollen in on their legs. And then they take it back to the hive and they provision their brood cells with the pollen combined with a little bit of nectar. The wasps have no use. I don't know of a single species of wasp, but there could be one that uses pollen in some way. But they still are, they're the obligate pollinators for the figs and the orchids in Australia, some of them. And they're the accidental pollinators of a lot of other plants as well that they visit. There's an argument that wasps are actually severely undercounted. Currently, they rank number 4 in the list of insect orders. The beetles are well known to be the largest order with about almost 400,000, let's just call it 400,000 species. Beetles have been studied intensely for 150 years, and there's a good reason to believe that a lot of them have been discovered already. Back in 19th century England, for example, it was very fashionable among the well-to-do to have a beetle collection, a collection of pinned beetles. And, they were probably proud about how big their collection was. And but for that, beetles are easy to catch. So that's one advantage to having a beetle collection. You don't have to go, you don't have to look too hard for them, and they're fairly stationary. And of course, everybody loves butterflies and moths, butterflies more so, I suppose, but the Lepidoptera have been well studied and well accounted for. We know, for example, in Tennessee, there are 124 species of butterflies that frequent Tennessee. There are 10 more that maybe are sort of accidental ones, but there have been 130 something species of butterflies reported at some level in the state of Tennessee. Flies are a little harder. Some of them are much smaller, but they're approximately the same in number worldwide as the Lepidoptera. And here we have our friends, the Hymenoptera, the sawflies, wasps, ants, and bees, and they're down there around, well, this says 116 because I got this out of Wikipedia, which was referencing a fairly old accounting. We now know that there are 150,000 plus Hymenopteran species, but I didn't want to use that number here when these other numbers are also old, so I'm just using the same research paper to get all this data from. With that in mind, though, a recent paper by, and I don't know how well you can read this, but here's the reference. The name of the paper is Quantifying the Unquantifiable, Why Hymenoptera, not Coleoptera, is the most specious animal order. So right now that record, as I mentioned, is held by the beetles, the Coleoptera, and that would be the largest order in the animal kingdom. Now, the argument, and I did look at the paper, did not study it, but I did look at it. The argument that there are so many more, in particular, wasps that are parasitoid, is that you go back to the gateway example. That parasitoid wasp only lays its eggs on a single, in this case, sawfly. Now, there are a lot of arthropods around. I mean, there's over 1 million, by far over 1 million arthropods, because there's that many just insects. And so each one of those is a potential candidate for a parasitoid wasp. And so they did a lot of data gathering and statistical projections. And at each point of their projections, if they chose the most conservative route, they claimed that there would be at least 800,000 Hymenopterans, mostly the parasitoid wasps. And then if you took a few other turns that weren't the most conservative, you could easily get several million wasp species. So whether this turns out to be true or not, I don't know, but this is a great time to specialize in wasp research, because apparently there are a lot of undiscovered species out there, and each one is a new research paper for you. So in this WASP ID class I saw all these PhD students and early postdocs, and thinking they had a pretty bright future with all the unknown wasps that are out there for them to discover. And they were just so enthusiastic. It was kind of inspiring to see that group of younger researchers hard at work. Okay, so now for some examples. We're going to see real wasps on real plants. And that's just my iNaturalist sightings. And so that's just a list that I used to make sure I didn't miss anything. But here we go. So this is the 4-banded stink bug hunter wasp. And I like some of these wasp titles because you know what they're parasitizing just from the name of the wasp. this wasp is parasitizing stink bugs. And so it's one of the sand wasps, they're called. The family is actually Carbonidae, but they nest in tunnels in sandy soil. They go out and find a particular type of stink bug. That's a big group. So they actually want to get a specific species or two. And then they bring them back to her nest, and she inserts several and seals the entrance. And so this is one that has the nest already built. She goes out, finds the stink bugs. She stings them, that paralyzes them, brings them back to the nest, puts them in with where the eggs are, and seals the entrance so that predators can't have easy access. Now, because the stink bugs are paralyzed but not dead, this provides fresh food for the eggs when they hatch into what would be their caterpillars, but they're but anyway, so that strategy is a common one among stinging wasps, even though they are parasitizing the insect. They're still in the stinging wasp group. So it's not a real clear distinction between those two groups of wasps, the parasitoids and the stinging wasps. So it's more that those are just common words to use, but they're not definitive in terms of the behavior of the wasp. Now, this is a big wasp, so it's not too bad to get a good picture of it. Especially the newer smartphones that have the telephoto lens on them can work quite well. This was, I believe this was in my yard. Most of the pictures I have are from my yard, but this is an easy one to identify. I've seen it a lot of times on mountain mint, and despite being 4-banded, it actually has 5 of those cream-colored or white-colored bands, and I think they're just not counting the tiny one at the bottom for some reason. A few more pictures, perhaps. That's probably the best. That's probably my best picture in terms of having the most in focus. And that plant there is mountain mint. It's called clustered mountain mint, or Pycnanthemum muticum. That's my best wasp attracting plant in my yard. I planted 2 or 3 many years ago. I've probably got a couple of hundred now in a 10-foot radius circle. And in July or so, it's just, there's a cloud of pollinators over it the whole month. I'm not sure what just happened. Anyway, I think there was a bug in my slide there, so to speak. This is a Cerceris species wasp, and I could not get that. I had no idea what I meant. Cerceris genus. I have no idea what species it is, but it's another stinging wasp, and it's one of the wasps that's in the same superfamily as the bees. And it's another sand wasp, and it's a soil nesting wasp in sandy areas, provides nests with stung beetles. It provisions them with stung beetles, usually from a family of beetles called the darkling beetle family. So it's a little specific, but when you're not parasitizing, I mean, what is going on here is that the beetle that's taken back is just food for the larva. And so you don't have to be too specific. If you're a parasitoid wasp, that's where things get very specific, because you've got to find where that larva is and get a stinger to it. And if it's in a wooden tree, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So I didn't feel so bad with this genus having 1,000 species, the fact that I couldn't figure out which one. And then Heather Holm and John Asher both ID'd it to genus, but couldn't get it farther. John Asher has about 100,000 bee IDs on iNaturalist, and Heather Holmes, of course, is a wasp expert. So iNaturalist is very handy for, I didn't know what that was at all to begin with, but iNaturalist made a few suggestions. I looked them up, went with a Cerceris species, Cerceris genus, and that's about as far as we can go. And that plant it's on, of course, is Golden Alexander. And so I don't get a lot of wasps on Golden Alexander, but in fact, this is the only picture I have of a Cerceris genus wasp. Another picture. I think I just zoomed in on the one I had. Now this is a different group called Scoliid superfamily. And it's again a stinging wasp. And it's some people call it a digger wasp. It burrows into the ground in search of June beetles and Japanese beetles. So this thing's kind of dive bombing in your yard, looking for a small group of beetles. And what it does is, again, it stings and paralyzes the beetle, but this one lays an egg on the spot. This lady doesn't have a nest back home waiting for her to bring stuff back to. And so she stings and then lays an egg on the wasp larva. And the larva on the wasp, and then when the egg hatches for the wasp, the larva consumes the beetle, pupates in the leftover body, typically overwinters, and then exits in the spring. So this life cycle is a little bit different than the other ones we've looked at. It still has these bands, these kind of cream-colored bands, but it has two main ones right there. It's got a tiny one right up there at the tip of the abdomen, and then this one dot thing at the back. So its wings, you can't really see that they're blue, but if the sun hits them right, you do get a lot of blue iridescence. Another picture. And so this is the double-banded Scoliid wasp. We've got another Scoliid wasp. So this wasp is also a parasitoid in the stinging group. The females fly over the ground looking for grubs of June bugs again, or other beetles. So it's going to be looking for beetles, and it's not highly selective as to exactly which ones it finds. So once she senses a June bug, she digs into the soil and then stings and paralyzes the beetle and lays an egg. And again, the grub, since it's not dead, it remains fresh for the egg she lays whenever it hatches. Okay, one more Scoliid wasp. This is the noble Scoliid wasp. I'm not sure what's noble about it, but it looks a lot different than the other Scoliid wasp we've seen. So this one looks for scarab beetle larvae or grubs. And again, it digs in the soil, stings the host, deposits an egg on the spot, and leaves it in place. And so some wasps have nests, and some just make a makeshift nest wherever they sting the grub that they're looking for. This one's very distinctive, though, with the reddish abdomen and the cream-colored stripe there. Sometimes it looks yellow. There it is again. Again on, guess I'm not sure what mountain mint that is. I think it's clustered, but I'm not positive. Oh, here it is on frostweed. So it's really just looking for nectar, so it doesn't really care where it comes from. Okay, so this one's from a group called thread-waisted wasps. Now it's called gold marked because you can't really see it, but it's got a gold marking right there that you can sort of see, but you have to use your imagination a bit. Okay, so this lady makes a 2-inch nest burrow near a wooded area. So she's going to get something and bring it back to her nest. And she hunts on leaves for caterpillars of various moths, including the sphinx moth. She'll sting and paralyze, return to the nest, and put the caterpillar in a cell. And she lays one egg on the caterpillar and closes the entrance. But you can see you see why it's called thread-waisted. Even the wing is just transparent enough that you can see that really, really thin waist. So I don't have a lot of confidence in this ID, but I'm pretty sure it's a Sphex genus. Whether it's the actual katydid moth or not, I can't confirm. But you know, I like the name because, you know, if it is a katydid moth, you know exactly what it's looking for to provision its young. So it's a ground nester, again, in sandy, gravelly soil. It has a main burrow, but it has multiple cells on the sides of the main burrow. And it will provision the cells with katydids and Carolina leaf roller crickets, which I had never heard of. Most of this information on the slides, by the way, is coming directly out of Heather Holmes' book called Wasps. You can also get it just in general using general Google searches, but I guess the wasps she's seen up in Minnesota are commonly seen here in Tennessee, because most of the ones I looked up that I saw, she also had an informative page on. Now, the Carolina leaf roller cricket is a wingless cricket, and it's called the Carolina leaf roller. Well, I don't know why it's called Carolina, but it's a leaf roller because it will protect itself by making silk and pulling two sides of a leaf together and wrap up in that leaf for protection. All right, so this is a Mexican grass-carrying wasp. This is a little different. It's not telling us what prey it's looking for. It's telling us something else. And so this again is in the thread-waisted wasp group, the Specidae family. And you can see clearly with the wings out of the way that this might be called a thread-waisted wasp. So it builds nests in above ground pre-existing cavities. And those might be hard to find, but you can always find sand to dig in, but that's actually gives a lot more safety to her babies, because things are there in the soil and can easily access the soil. But if it's an above ground nest, it's going to be harder to predate. So she finds crickets and katydids, and she brings them back to the nest. And she has, in the meantime, built cells in that cavity using chewed up grass. And so there's enough, that's how she builds her cells. There's a little bit of construction going on here. So she carries the grass back to the nest, builds cells for the offspring, goes out and gets the katydids or crickets, brings them back, and puts them in the cavity and seals it up. Just another picture of the, so this waste looks a little thicker than the top view looked in the previous picture. I believe they're the same species, but they may not be the same individual. And this is a fairly common wasp. You can look up, this is one you can get a lot of information off of, including using Heather's book. Just a closer picture. I think that's let's see, Mexican grass. There's probably a mistake in one of these slides. This is, I've got this labeled Mexican grass carrying wasp as well. So let's just move on to that one. So the last three are just examples of red wasps. They're the ones that annoy you around your house, because some of them build nests in the eaves and things like that. They're all in the Polistes genus. And so, and they're in the Vespoidea superfamily, and the Vespid wasps are bad news. They're the ones that give you stings, because they're social nests in social animals defending a nest. So this particular one, though, Polistes carolina, she is on some eastern red cedar wood that I used to build a lattice out front where I have my morning glories climb during the summer. You can see a lot of wasp scratches and scrapings from that particular post. So she builds nests in a tree and building cavities, like, attaching to your eaves. Uses cellulose for nest support. So it's the cellulose is what the nest is, supports the nest, and what the paper structure on the wasp nest is. She brings back caterpillars chewed to a manageable lump size and placed in the cells, those hexagonal cells in the nest. That's just another picture of perhaps a different red paper wasp. So this is another red paper wasp, but I don't have it ID'd to species. It's in the subgenus Fusco. So I don't know which species it is, but it's pretty much the same story. It builds nests at various sites across wherever it can find. It also goes for caterpillars, chews them up to a good size, and then sticks them in the nest cells. But notice this one's different from the red paper wasp we saw earlier because it's got a dark abdomen with this funny little cutout here. And so that's a good way to distinguish them. Okay, we've already seen this group, so let me move on. So this is the last one, metric paper wasp, Pollinator metricus. Again, it builds nests in various sites wherever it can get the structure to stand up. Prey in this case again consists of caterpillars and chewed to this size and provision the nest. So all these the other two, red paper wasp, and this one's called the metric paper wasp, but they all have pretty much the same life strategy. They have that nest that they defend voraciously, and they work pretty much the same way. So I do have one wasp story. I was hiking near the Appalachian Trail in Northeast Georgia, on my brother's property, actually. And I was with my sister-in-law, I think we were married by then, so let's say my spouse, and two of their dogs, two of my brother's dogs. And the dogs found a yellow jacket nest, apparently, and stuck their nose in. And one yelped, but the yellow jackets came out, and one stung me on the ankle, and I instinctively kind of slapped at the area. And I suspect I marked myself with a pheromone because they all came to me at that point. And we were in a place where the only exits were uphill. And I was having a little trouble about halfway up the hill. I was losing some muscle control because I'm assuming the neurotoxins were getting to me. So anyway, I eventually got out of there and then regrouped at the house. And I was in a bit of shock, I think. But anyway, we went to the neighborhood emergency room, kind of urgent service place. And when we got in there, they said I was about the fourth one that week. This was in August in the mountains of North Georgia. And so that's when the yellow jacket population pretty well spikes. And the dogs, I'm pretty sure, got the yellow jackets predisposed to sting anyway. But they knew they had the protocol down because they've been doing it for 4 weeks already. And so they knew exactly what to give me. It was, no problem. I was feeling great by the time I left there, thanks to the wonders of modern medicine. And luckily, I didn't have any sort of reaction to the venom. But anyway, so that's my wasp story. So if anybody has an excuse to not like wasps, it's me. But I find them fascinating. So I do have some references if you're interested. The Biodiversity and Classification of Wasps is the book that was used for the WASP ID course that I took. It's freely available. It's in the public domain. And the Digital Object Index, let's see, what does that stand for? Digital Object something or other. If you simply copy that string down, that will take you to a web page where you can download the 500-page book. And then you too can be given a WASP presentation in a month. The Heather Holmes book, of course, is wonderful. That's a commercial product. The Hymenoptera of the World, which I mentioned earlier, is freely downloadable. All you have to do is type Hymenoptera of the World in a search engine, and it'll take you right to it. It's a little out of date because in WASP taxonomy years, 1993 is the olden days. That's a group of classifications that is changing very rapidly. I'd also like to draw you to the attention of Sloan Tomlinson's Instagram page. He's that WASP guy that I mentioned earlier. I didn't show all of his or some of his pictures on purpose because some people don't easily see or appreciate the beauty of a bunch of larvae exiting a caterpillar body. Or there's another wasp that parasitizes monarch chrysalises. And so he's got a picture of a monarch chrysalis as a bunch of small wasp are crawling out of the chrysalis. I'm sure he edited that picture quite a bit, but it's a pretty striking picture. And then I use various other web resources. So if you have any questions, I think everybody knows how to get in touch with me. It's just richardhitt@gmail. And so feel free to give me any follow-up questions that you like. And thank you very much for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about wasps. So I can unshare my screen. And if there are any questions, we can, I can't talk and unshare my screen at the same time, apparently. So let me work on that.
You unshared.
Oh, good. I'm good.
Yep.
Great. Apparently I can talk and unshare my screen. I just didn't know it.
So I have a question.
I wasn't watching the chat because I was trying to
There's nothing in
what
the
I was
chat.
doing. You want to take over, Paul?
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat here.
Okay,
So, but I do have a question.
sure.
So the wasps are social, but I mean, if we're not around the nest, should we really be concerned? Well, since they're defending their
So,
nest,
Only a
then-
few wasps are social, and those are the ones that build the a substantial nest. So hornets certainly are, yellow jackets, and a few things like that. But the other wasps that aren't social, they could conceivably sting you if they thought you were threatening their nest. But I've never had a close encounter like that. So
I just wondered if we, obviously they're flying around us all the time, and some of them we never see. But the paper
Right.
wasps, everything else that we kind of know about, people start running as soon as they see one. And they're not super aggressive if you're not anywhere near their nest. Is that my understanding?
that's the way it's been with me. If I have these red wasps around all the time in especially in fall and later in fall when they're mating, but I've never had an issue with them because they actually nest inside the wall cavity of my house. The outside I'm not sure, the fascia boards around the windows are not completely sealed off, and they come into that area. Sometimes they come into the house and I have to usher them back out. But I've never had a problem with the paper wasp, but I know that I know other people that have, because they're kind of swatting at him, because they think they're trying to attack him, and I don't think they're trying to attack him at all until they start getting swatted, and then they get pissed off. So
Yeah.
I'm even with my wasp story, I feel perfectly comfortable around the red wasp, even though they are social critters. I'm not, near their nest, so I feel fine.
Can you say
Richard,
more
is
about that?
Kristen, why don't you go ahead and we'll take
Can
turns.
you say more about that pheromone thing when you said you slapped your ankle? And I asked because my husband and I and my dog were at the farm, and we came on I don't even remember how we stirred him up, but it was a yellow jacket nest, and they stung the heck out of my husband. They were not at all interested in me. I'll have to admit that I did do some chuckling about that. And then my dog got it, and it just about killed her. She ended up at the vet for a couple of days.
So it was just a conjecture on my part that when I swatted that yellow jacket, that it released a pheromone, because I haven't looked that up and don't know that that's what happened. But for some reason, as soon as I did that, I just felt the whole nest on me. And I was wearing a red shirt that came, and it was a short sleeve shirt. And they only stung where that red shirt was, and they got my back. It was we estimated 170 sting marks at the emergency room. And it's funny, the bite stopped as soon as the sleeve stopped on my shirt. So I've always been puzzled by that. I tell you, I don't tend to wear red shirts on hikes these days anymore, but I don't know that it had specifically to do with the red color.
Well, they were uninterested in me and very interested in my husband and the dog.
I don't know, but yellow jackets are really bad because they're ground nesters, and you can't always see the nest unless they're very active flying in and out of it. And so I know people with riding lawnmowers, you just go right over them. The vibrations get the wasps upset, and they go check it out what did it. And some people get stung that way. So yeah, the ground nesters are a real problem because you can inadvertently stir them up, whereas the paper wasps that build their nests under the eaves, you always know where they are, and they're fairly safe.
Mm.
I don't know that this would help in your situation where you had so many stings, but if you just get a 1 or 2 stings, plantain will actually literally almost instantly stop the sting pain and will draw the poison out. You
So
just
how do you prepare that?
you, you chew it,
Oh yeah,
which
got it.
you just put the leaf in your mouth and chew it and apply the poultice to the sting, and it stops the pain almost instantly, and it will draw the poison out so that you don't have any effects.
Would heal all work in that situation as well?
I've not tried heal all. I can swear by the plantain. I haven't heard that. I'll research that, Richard, get back to you.
Heal all has a history that I'm not familiar with in terms of that sort of medicinal use, but I think I heard a story about Dennis Horn getting his foot cut in a creek bed, and then an ethnobotanist was along and found some heal all and prepared it and packed it in his foot, and that everything was fine from then on.
Yeah, it might help with cuts and stuff. I'll find out and get back with you.
Okay,
All right.
just a side thought.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is probably a stupid question because I don't know anything about wasps, but are all the wasps that you talked about, for lack of a better term, native to North America, or
They
have
are.
some been imported?
Yeah, they're all native, and they're all ones, except for the Cerceris genus one, they're all ones that I see with some regularity. So I'm kind of surprised I keep seeing these same wasps over and over again, because in the United States there are, I guess I didn't give that statistic, but I know worldwide there are about 150,000 members of Hymenoptera, and about 130,000 of those are wasps. In the United States, I guess I'm forgetting what the number is in the United States. I'm pretty sure I've seen it, but it's 10 to 20,000 in that kind of range. And roughly a third of those would be east of the Mississippi. So now we're down to about 7,000. So we should have about 7,000 species flying around east of the Mississippi. And, I keep seeing these same ones over and over again. So of course, I only see the big ones. There are wasps that are 2 millimeters big, which is less than 1/10 of an inch. And so one of the reasons that that paper I mentioned from 2018 thinks we're going to discover eventually so many wasps is that all these 2 millimeter wasps and 5 millimeter wasps are going to finally get identified and classified. And that, together with the parasitoid wasps that they think will explode in number once they're all identified, are the reasons they think we're going to have so many wasps worldwide, like 800,000 as a minimum. Now, those are, of course, wasp specialists, promoting their own game. They want to be number one and not have Coleoptera stealing the crown on them. But the research is pretty solid. It's got some subtle mathematics going on in there about how they're being careful with the projected count. So anyway, I was impressed for a group of wasp experts.
Is there any reason to think wasps are faring better than the other insects in the big insect decline?
Yeah, that's a good question that I haven't thought of. I don't know if wasps are any better outfitted to weather the storm or not, but just as a general statement, according to the UN reports, biodiversity is decreasing and is doing so at an increasing rate. So it means it's not only going down, it's going down at a steeper and steeper rate each year. And that rate is unknown, but it's probably around 1% per year compounded. And that's a very poorly understood problem. And so the best research paper I've seen is titled Insects in the Anthropocene, which is what they are considering renaming our Holocene epoch, is maybe going to be renamed to the beginning of the Anthropocene, which just indicates humans have influenced the anthropo part, that humans are influencing the geology considerably in terms of what they find in the layers. But Yeah, I don't know if the wasps, you would think maybe they would fare better because they have this sort of waspy reputation of being pretty aggressive, but I don't know that that's based on anything. So that would be a good question to look into. So I don't really know.
Steve had a second question.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Oh,
and
yeah.
my information may be a little bit off, but seems like I read something a while back about the problem with the emerald ash borer, and part of the problem is that there isn't a natural predator in North America to the emerald ash borer, and they found a wasp or something that preyed on emerald ash borers, and they were talking about importing a wasp that would attack emerald ash borers. And I thought to myself, as if we didn't screw up, with getting the emerald ash borer. That's just what we need to do, is import something else. But have you read anything like that about import? And maybe it wasn't the emerald ash borer. Maybe it was something
No,
else.
it could have been something else, but they're definitely trying that with the emerald ash borer. And so the emerald ash borer, you're correct, it has no natural enemies here. And so what we need is a targeted parasitoid wasp that only attacks the emerald ash borer. So now imagine that experiment runs beautifully and we eliminate all the emerald ash borers. What's that wasp going to do? Is it going to adapt to a new species? And so that would be the concern. I have heard that they have done trials with this Chinese wasp in Georgia, but I haven't heard any of the details. And how they do these trials with that just totally releasing the wasp, I really don't know. But it's a little scary because we can't know. We would just run the risk of unintended consequences down the road, and we don't know how that's going to go.
Yeah.
But the alternative is to lose all 24 billion ash trees in the continental United States. That's it's 8 billion ash trees in the continental United States, but that's 24 ash trees per person alive in the United States. So it's going to be quite a catastrophe. And but yeah, there are all sorts of efforts looking at ways to save the ash trees. There's a project called Lingering Ash where they go through a wood lot that's been hit by the beetle and see if there are any trees that have survived, and then they reproduce those trees and cross-pollinate them to try to get a viable ash tree that's less susceptible to the emerald ash borer. So I don't know if that's going to work out, but yeah, that's definitely one of the things when invasive species people get together. That's one of the things they always talk about, is rolling out the perfect parasitoid wasp to target your one problem. I think there's a fancy name for that process, but I forget what it is.
Maybe you just need to train your wasps, Richard, to attack emerald ash borers.
That's right. Yeah, and if we had programmable wasps, we could just dial up, with Casper. What's that technology? The gene editing tool. CRISPR. Yeah, CRISPR-Cas. Yeah, we could kind of take an existing wasp and modify it so that it would target whatever we wanted. So again, that's an experiment that could have some pretty serious unintended consequences. But
they did it with mosquitoes in Florida.
Yeah.
Made them sterile.
Yeah, I forget how they're doing that, but mosquitoes, it turns out from what I've read, that we could actually live without them. They're not performing an indispensable service in the ecology. There's not enough meat there to if it disappears, we haven't lost enough meat to really matter. It's kind of interesting, but I'll continue with my bucket of doom in the backyard and see how that goes.
I've got mine ready to go.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It was fun last year. Any other questions? Well, great.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, it was surprisingly fun to put together. So that was good, because I thought there were times when I doubted myself that it wasn't such a great idea to do this after all. But anyway, I was glad I got it together, and I had fun doing it. So that's a win-win. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we will. I'll get a newsletter out coming up the 1st of April, and we'll see what's coming up. So thanks a lot. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Richard. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everybody.